Hi, it's Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter, and it has been a minute since the last podcast. I hope you've been having a wonderful and creative year. And today's topic is how to get back into your hobby after a hiatus. And I would consider podcasting kind of a hobby, one that I haven't done much over the past year and a half, and we'll get into that. And also, I'm going to share some tips and tricks on how you can get back into it when it's been a while since you've last picked up a brush or a needle or I don't know, what else do you create with a bead or whatever your craft implement of choice is. So the reason I haven't been doing podcasts in the last year and a half or so is because my husband went back to his full-time job in radio, and it just happened to coincide very well with my daughters going off to college and the house being an empty nest. We didn't need the extra parent around to do the extra work. Jason had been working in my business, which did give me some time to work on the podcast and do those little extra things. So without him here, I definitely had to prioritize the parts of my business that made the most impact, that had the most viewership and whatnot. And I love my intimate little podcast audience, but I needed to put it on the back burner until I caught my bearings. And I kind of feel like I am there. Now, maybe you're at a point in your life where things are calming down. Maybe you had a really busy time, a busy couple of months or years, and you're finally feeling like you have the mental bandwidth to embrace your creativity again. Well, congratulations. That's awesome. I am so glad. Or maybe you're feeling that you're very stressed out. You don't have the time, but you yearn for those creative moments. And if that's the case, I'm here for you. I hope to help you with whatever your struggle is with creativity. So, first thing I'm going to say is to be gentle and kind with yourself as you get back into your creative endeavor. You're going to be a little rusty. This podcast is probably going to be a little rusty because I'm not used to doing it. It's been a while, and it's been a while since you've picked up your craft. Maybe those knitting needles have been gathering dust, or those crochet hooks, or those paintbrushes. Be kind to yourself. Don't expect the first thing you do to be a masterpiece. Maybe start with something small. If it's knitting or crochet, maybe make a granny square or a dishcloth or something that you're not going to be too worried about making perfect. I hadn't crocheted in a while, and I had a yearning to around Christmas time, and life was a little busy and crazy, but I just felt like I need to do this. I need to do this to relax. And I went to my local store. I grabbed a skein of super chunky yarn because I knew that I could work up a hat really quickly with that. And I crocheted a hat, and it felt good to get it done. Plus, I gave it as a gift. It came out good enough to give as a gift. So it also served another purpose. So maybe you could think of your creative endeavor, maybe think of a practical application for it. And I don't think you should have to have a practical application to be creative, but sometimes that helps. Maybe you really want to scrapbook. You haven't scrapbooked in a long time, but it may feel frivolous because you didn't really have a specific need to. Do you have a friend or relative with a new baby or family member or pet that you would like to make a gift for? You could do a scrapbook page and frame it. You could do a small mini album. You could do, oh, maybe like a card. You can make a card for somebody that's had a new baby or a new pet, or maybe a condolence card if somebody has lost a relative or something like that. You can put that creativity into a very practical use that will go ahead and brighten somebody else's day. I think that's why a lot of people went from making scrapbook pages to cards, because the cards felt very practical. Maybe you kind of aged out of scrapbooking, which is, I kind of feel like I aged out of scrapbooking a bit because it was very practical when the kids were little to preserve those memories and have them in books that they could look through. But as they got older, I had fewer and fewer pictures to scrapbook. And now I scrapbook on a yearly basis, and it's to make scrapbook calendars. So I make a calendar out of cardstock. I print off a printable calendar. I use, I think it's called freepdfcalendar.com. It's absolutely free. And I print out a year and I bind it together with a comb binding machine. I printed on some heavyweight cardstock. And then after it's together, I scrapbook on the opposite pages. So basically on the backs, the calendar spreads, I do a scrapbook. Everything is acid free, so it can be kept for, forever. And I do 8.5 by 11 inch scrapbook pages basically. And I can I can orient my calendar so it is either landscape or portrait, and it just works out really well. And these are gifts from my mom, my parents. I used to do them for my mother-in-law too when she was still alive, and they were great. They were keepsakes. They were practical. They'd have a new layout up every month. And then at the end of the year, they've got the calendar, which they can flip through as a scrapbook. And plus, if you write what you've done, where your appointments are, what things you did on different days, you actually have kind of like a journal too, to you can remember different dates, different events. It can be handy if you're looking back to see when you went to the dentist last. So that's practical, it's beautiful, and it gives you kind of a reason. Sometimes I find that with creativity, it really helps to have an external deadline, and maybe making that hat for a relative for Christmas, or making a scrapbook calendar for somebody, or making a birthday card for somebody. Maybe that's the external deadline. Now, birthday cards are really fun because you could do, no matter what sort of craft you like to partake in, you could do a card that is stitched if you like to do embroidery. You could do a watercolor greeting card. You could do a collage card. You could do an acrylic painting on a little like mixed media card. There are so many options, and cards are a small canvas, so you can spend half an hour. And if it's not perfect, if it's not like frame worthy, it really doesn't matter. It's something ephemeral. Now, obviously, the person that gets that card may treasure it forever and want to frame it, and that's totally awesome if that's the case. But if they don't, that's okay too, because a card is meant to be given and received, right? So it will have fulfilled its purpose. And if you do end up making a masterpiece on a 5x7 canvas and you don't want to give it away, you want to frame it and keep it for yourself, that's totally okay. It's your work. You can do whatever you want with it. So it can really be an accessible way to dip your feet back into being creative. Maybe you're a jewelry maker and you have more earrings and necklaces than you'll ever wear. Maybe you want to make something for someone else, or maybe you want to make a few and then sell them at a local craft fair. That's fine too. Use up your stash, and then you can use that money to buy some new beads that excite you. You'll feel like, and I don't think you should ever feel like you have to turn your hobby or your art into a business. But if affording supplies is challenging, or maybe you don't feel comfortable making more where you've made so much unless you sold some, then go ahead and sell some, and then take that money and buy some more supplies and make some more. Eh, But you may also realize that you don't like making them after you've sold them. You may be relieved after you've sold a bunch of them and you used up your supplies that you can get out of a hobby. Sometimes we do hobbies out of obligation. And I think that's really interesting because there's a weird dynamic here to our hobbies. We buy the supplies and then we feel guilty if we don't use them. Or we feel kind of precious and afraid to use them. Or we buy them for a project, we do the project, and then we decide whether we want to do another project. What kind of crafter are you? Do you find that your supplies become precious and you're afraid you're going to use them up? Or do you feel guilty that you bought them in the first place? I don't know why we have such baggage around the things we buy for enjoyment, but we do. Maybe we feel like we don't deserve to enjoy our time or spend our money the way we want to spend them. Maybe we feel like it's frivolous because it's not food on the table or roof over our head. It's a luxury. It is a luxury, but I think that it is a worthy luxury. You wouldn't say it's a luxury to go get your yearly physical. I mean, it is kind of a luxury in this country, sadly, but you wouldn't be hard on yourself about that. No, you'd go and you would do it. That's worthwhile. You wouldn't say it's a luxury to eat a healthy meal. It is a luxury, but you do it, you deserve it. You feel like you deserve it, you should. The same thing with your hobbies. If you can afford it, if you have the time to do it, you should absolutely indulge. I think that a lot of times we get stuck with decision fatigue. We look at all of our supplies and we just get confused. We're like, well, what am I going to make with this? If I make this project with these supplies, then I won't have the supplies to make the next project. The thing is, though, your supplies go a lot further than you think they will. And if you use your supplies up to make this project, you can always get more supplies. Even with the shortages that we've experienced over the last couple of years, there's still plenty of supplies. You may have to get a different brand. You might get one that you like a little bit less, or maybe one you like a little bit more. You might have to branch out, but there's always going to be more supplies. So use them. You are not going to get better at your hobby without burning through some supplies, sadly. Sometimes your things aren't going to turn out, especially if you're coming back after a long hiatus. You're going to have some bad pancakes. I always call it the bad pancake effect because you might be starting in on something. Your first try is going to be a little iffy, but you'll see something you like about it. So you'll try it again. And, by that second or third project, that second or third pancake, you've got something that you really like, just like when you're baking pancakes. So you got to push through that awkward, ugly first step of a project. And then you'll settle into the sweet spot where you are in the flow state and you feel things coming together and you're happy with your results. Just don't judge it by those first little attempts that you make at getting back into your hobby. The other reason that I think it's hard to get back into a hobby that we haven't done in a while is that it's hard. It's easier to look at Pinterest and think about creating a project, or even just to scroll social media in general, or to watch TV. There's so many frictionless forms of entertainment and pastimes that we could do instead of pulling out our supplies and making the effort to create art. But it's so worth it when you think of the payoff that you get from watching a TV show or scrolling social media or looking for project ideas on Pinterest. You may get those little tiny hits of dopamine that are fine while you're doing them, but then when you're done, a couple hours later, you'll feel empty. Like, what did I just do with that time? I've just wasted my time. And time is forget about supplies. Time is our only finite resource. We can get more supplies. We can't get more time. So think about that when you are feeling lazy. You want to create something, but you're just having a hard time getting motivated. Think of the time you're spending or the time you're wasting when you're not working on something you're truly passionate about. So I think that's the other hurdle. It's just easier to do passive things than to do active things. So get in there, grab the supplies, and be active. So now I want to offer a few tips on how it could be easier to jump back into that hobby. The first thing would be create a dedicated space where you can create. And this does not have to be fancy. It could be a box that you set out on your kitchen table with all your supplies in it all ready to go. It could be a card table in the corner of your basement. It could be a little desk in the corner of your bedroom, some place that you can leave relatively set up and ready to go. So it removes the friction between you and creating your art. It minimizes that setup time. When my twins were babies, I used to create when they were napping. And sometimes it would take me almost their entire nap time just to get set up. So what I would do is I just set up a little writing desk in my bedroom with my supplies right in the top drawer. So all I had to do was open the drawer. I could pull out the few things I needed and I could get right to work. That made it possible to create in those 45 minutes of time when all three children were napping at the same time, that precious overlap. So think of a way that you can create that sort of atmosphere. It could be a basket with a bunch of jars in it with all of your different supplies set out there. It could be a lap desk. It could be just a drawer in your kitchen even. Like maybe clean out the junk drawer and use that as a supply drawer so you can pull the drawer out, take it to the table and work. You want to reduce that friction. If you think about why some companies are very successful, think Amazon, for instance, they're successful because they are frictionless. You can go from thinking about a product to buying it in a couple of clicks. If you don't know what you want to buy, you can browse and they'll find you something to buy. It's frictionless. So what you want to do is make your art frictionless, or anything that you want to accomplish. You could make your exercise frictionless by sleeping in sweatpants so that you could just get up and put your sneakers on and go for a jog first thing in the morning. Do things that make it easy on yourself. After a while, you won't even need to do that, but just while you're getting started, make it easy. Maybe it's a sketchbook and some pencils tucked into the pocket on the side of your recliner. So when you're sitting in your chair and you're thinking about scrolling on your phone or watching some TV, you can grab that sketchbook and you can start drawing. Draw anything that you can see. Just make it frictionless and don't worry about the outcome. It may be awful, it may be great. Really, what matters is the process, because even if your art attempts or your craft attempts aren't successful, you're learning. Failure actually leads to more learning than success does. I know when you think about the best lessons you've had in your life, didn't they usually come with some pain and some loss attached to them? Usually those good lessons are expensive and you might waste some time, you might waste some supplies, but you're going to be better off for it. So think about that, and think, if you're creating, if you are making an effort to make something, that's a positive. Even if it doesn't come out right, it's still a positive. That's one of the best ways you can spend your time. So just get in there and do it regardless of the outcome. Enjoy the process. So I hope you found this podcast to be a little bit inspiring. I'm going to keep it short-ish so that you can go and embark on your creative journey today. It doesn't have to be a big ordeal. I find that sometimes when I'm trying to get back into a craft, like card making, for instance, I took a really long card making hiatus. And anytime I went to make a card, it was the biggest ordeal. I felt like I needed to have all of these pattern papers and all of these stamps and all of these embellishments and all of this and all of that. And I just didn't want to do it. It was too much. It was too overwhelming. So maybe I just grab a stamp and grab some markers and make it easy, make it simple. Try to simplify your process so it's not daunting. Once you get past those first few projects that have kind of guided you back into your hobby, you'll find that you can dig into the more in-depth stuff if you want to, or maybe you want to keep it simple. Maybe you've changed. Maybe you don't like that hobby anymore. So still try it, do it. If you decide that that hobby's not for you anymore, you can get rid of the supplies in good faith and have a clear conscience about it and not have regret, because you'll know that, yeah, I used to scrapbook, I used to enjoy it, but now I prefer watercolor painting, or I prefer playing the piano, or I prefer playing the guitar or knitting or crochet or watercolor or whatever it is. We all change. And if those supplies no longer serve us, if you don't see yourself in a world where you're going to use those tools and supplies again, you can pass them along and feel good about it. So even if you discover a hobby is not for you after you get back into it, that is totally fine. There are so many hobbies out there. There are so many forms of art. There are so many wonderful things to do with our time that isn't passive, that isn't scrolling, that isn't wasteful. So go after what you want and strive, create, try, put some effort in, because if it's worth doing, it's worth putting the effort in. Hope this inspires you. Thank you so much for listening to the Frugal Crafter podcast. Until next time, happy crafting.